fourth arrest. He has not been arraigned in this case. The three previous arrests had arraignments on the same day. This one did not. In that way, it was different from the three previous ones. Also, of course, the image on the right side of your screen, the mugshot of the 45th President of the United States. It's not the only mugshot that we've seen this week that might have caused us a moment of pause. Here is the man who in 2001 was Times Person of the Year, former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani. That's his mugshot for his 13 counts in the indictment in Fulton County, Georgia. Here is former White House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows, not the first White House Chief of Staff to ever pose for a mugshot. Nixon's Chief of Staff, H.R. Bob Haldeman, also posed for one and ended up doing 18 months in prison. Here is political operative from Wisconsin, Kenneth Chesebro, known or considered to be the architect of the fake electors scheme, perhaps less well-known a face, but his request for a speedy trial is going to have an impact on what happens in this case. Let's bring in right now Pulitzer Prize-winning New York Times reporter Maggie Haberman to talk about this important day. And Maggie, obviously, Mr. Trump, and let's to be frank, it would be political malpractice for him not to do so, but he is using this mugshot and trying to raise money off of it, posting it on Truth Social. We know that the former president is someone who cares quite a bit about his image and legacy. This pose that he considers to be menacing, we're told, is part of that. He does not like to be perceived as a loser, despite what he would call perhaps braggadocious behavior and statements in light of this. How do you think this latest arrest and mugshot in particular, and the fingerprinting and all of what he went through today, how do you think that's actually sitting with him tonight?
I don't think especially well, Jake. From what I heard from people who had spoken to him, he actually seemed less agitated heading into today than he had the previous three indictments, which is still a remarkable sentence to say. But he doesn't want to be mugshotted. He doesn't want to be arrested. He doesn't want to have what in his mind is the indignity of going to this jail and then, submitting to a photo and a mugshot and fingerprinting. And to your point about the visuals of him, it isn't just that he wants to look menacing, which is certainly true, and he has made that kind of face in photos for years and years and years. He doesn't want to look weak, and that's what that's about. And so, circulating the mugshot, fundraising off of it, owning it, using it for press, that's all part of a playbook that we have seen him use over and over again, but that does not mean he's enjoying any of this. This is a serious thing. He is facing serious jail time.
And explain to me, to the capacity that anyone on this planet can, how refusing to accept a clear, decisive electoral defeat in 2020 and desperately attempting any way possible to hold on to power legally and then extra legally and then illegally, at least according to the special counsel and the Fulton County DA, how is that not weak?
Because in his mind, he didn't concede. And that has been how he has operated for decade after decade after decade, through business failures, through bankruptcies of his casinos, through losses, through products failing, through divorces. It has all been, if you pretend it is not happening, if you create your own reality, if you don't give in to what other people are acknowledging as objective reality, then maybe it really isn't there. And he is somebody who does not think in terms of long-term strategy. He thinks in very short increments of time, and it's all about just getting from one post to another. And so that is how somebody thinks like that. It's also how somebody thinks who has lived, Jake, and this doesn't really get said, I think, enough about him. Mm-hmm. He lived a fairly consequence-free life before he was president. The bankruptcies cost the banks. Now, he did not like the press. He was very unhappy about it. But the bankruptcies were a loss to the banks. Generally, he had his father to help bail him out. He has moved from one thing to another without having to really face the kind of consequences that other people might have in similar circumstances. So this is an unusual moment.
There was another shakeup of Mr. Trump's legal team today. His new attorney, Stephen Sadow, was with him tonight, met him in person on the tarmac at Hartsfield-Jackson International Airport in Atlanta. What can you tell us about the decision to bring Sadow on? We should note that Sadow is a very well-respected defense attorney, but why switch now?
It's obviously notable that he's switched several hours before he went to go be arrested in Georgia. My understanding, Jake, is this had been in the works for several weeks. He was always planning on adding to the team. Sadow had been in discussions with Trump's world for some time, as I understand it. Trump, I think, only recently was introduced to him, but there was a decision to let his other lawyer, Drew Feindling, go, and that came in the wake of the indictment. It seems specific to it. My understanding is that Trump wanted what he considered a stronger team. Sadow, as you know, has an incredibly good reputation in the state, and I think came very highly recommended to Trump. But it is a sign that Trump recognizes the significance and severity and seriousness of these charges, too.
Yeah, and as you know, the former president is expected to make the move that we've already seen Mark Meadows make, which is to try to get this case moved from Georgia court to a federal court. It's probably underrated how likely that actually is to happen. Some of the experts we have been speaking with on the panel today feel that it's more likely than not. If that fails, though, the state trial would likely be televised. The federal one would not. Would Donald Trump, do you think, in the event that this does actually get heard in a Georgia court where cameras are allowed, would he, do you think, embrace that? Or would he try to get cameras barred from the courthouse?
I actually think that he would embrace it, Jake, although I don't think that there's unanimity of opinion around him about how to handle that. I think your point that legal experts, and we've been hearing the same thing, think that there is a real chance, it's not definite obviously, but there is a real chance that a removal motion, meaning asking for this trial to be moved to federal court because these were actions taken in the capacity, they'll argue, of his office. Prosecutors, I think, would argue that it was outside of his capacity, but he was a federal office holder. There is a non-zero chance that that happens, and if that happens, this does change things significantly.
Yeah, it doesn't have anything to do with whether or not somebody thinks Donald Trump is guilty or not guilty. This is just a question of law, and the law would seem to say there's a plausible case that a judge will rule that it does belong in federal court. The jail, Fulton County Jail, that Donald Trump was processed at today, we've been noting that it's notorious for its harsh conditions. The Justice Department is investigating it. Prisoners more regularly than they should die while in custody. We saw images earlier today. Drew Griffin, our reporter, Brian Todd, our reporter, showed us images of the inside of the jail. It's shockingly awful. What do you imagine that experience was like for Donald Trump, who I think has probably never been inside a building like that before?
I don't think he has, no, Jake. I can't imagine any circumstance in his life that we're unaware of where he would have been. I think it was jarring. I think we should note that he was there pretty briefly. His aides filled out the paperwork about his vitals, his weight, his height, and so forth, his eye color, all the things that are there ahead of time, and it expedited the process. But I think even briefly, it's a very jarring experience. As we said before, this is not something that he's craving. I understand that he is using the mugshot politically. It would be very surprising were he not. When there wasn't a mugshot in Manhattan when he was indicted and then arrested in April, they generated a fake one. So it's not a surprise that he's using it. But this is not an experience that he wants. This is an experience that I think brings home the stark reality of what this is, which is a criminal case. And to your point about where he was headed today and how grim the circumstances are and how grim the location was, they've done very little. They've they've had sort of descending appearances and public statements from him since the second indictment, where the second indictment he had yet another, after, as he did with the first one, an event at one of his clubs, and he gave a big speech, a very defiant speech. He hasn't done that the last two times, and I think that is partly a recognition of diminishing returns possibly in fundraising, but also concern that his legal team has about some of what he is saying, both in terms of possibly violating the conditions of his release in these cases and in terms of saying things that could be problematic in court. And that just, again, this is dealing with something real. This is not politics. This is not a game. We don't know what will happen in these cases, and he has the presumption of innocence just like any other defendant, but this is a serious thing.
Well, right. I mean, this is the first time that his lies, and look, it's not illegal to lie to the press. It's not illegal to lie to the public. You and I know this, having been journalists for decades with politicians far beyond just Donald Trump. Politicians tell lies all the time, perhaps not at the rapid clip of Mr. Trump, but politicians tell lies all the time, and there's not a crime about it. Lying to officials, though, in an official capacity, not just FBI agents, but in proceedings, of course, at least that is the legal theory that Fani Willis, the district attorney of Fulton County, is trying and testing. That can be construed as a crime. That is certainly what she is attempting to do. And this might be the first time this and the special counsel, Jack Smith's indictment of him for the similar attempted subversion of the election in battleground states. This is the first time that there's ever really been any accountability, as far as I can tell, for lies that he's told.
I think to your point, he wasn't indicted for lying, which is something that his supporters have insisted is what happened. He was indicted for what he lied about and how he used those lies. And it was using those lies, according to prosecutors, in the service of trying to use the apparatus of government to impact these official proceedings, and these official proceedings were about the transfer of power in this country and about his efforts to stay in office despite the fact that he had lost the election and been told over and over again that he had lost the election and that there was no chance. You know, we talk a lot, Jake, about how crucial, and I was having this conversation with someone else this week, we talk a lot about how crucial that Oval Office meeting on December 18th, 2020, that I wrote about and my now colleague Jonathan Swan wrote about after it had taken place. But it was crucial, and that's where he was being urged to consider using the apparatus of government to seize voting machines and rerun the election. But a really crucial moment came in mid-November when his then lawyer at the time, one of his top campaign aides, Justin Clark, was arguing with Rudy Giuliani, and Trump basically sided with Giuliani. And that was the moment that set everything that happened after that in motion.
Unlike Donald Trump's previous arrests, this one was in prime time. Do you think that was a deliberate choice? Not because he wanted to avoid traffic in Jersey, but because he wanted this prime time coverage where more people are at home and more televisions are on?
I think he certainly prefers getting out his side and what he wants to say, Jake, but I think this was probably an easier time at the jail where it was less busy. I mean, we're talking about a wildly famous criminal defendant and trying to figure out how to work around somebody who has Secret Service protection. The size of that motorcade was massive. It is not exactly like Donald Trump is someone who rolls light. It's not the same as Mark Meadows getting processed as he was hours earlier, or Rudy Giuliani yesterday, despite all of the attention around Rudy Giuliani. This has a lot of mechanics to it. Now, I'm sure that they would have accommodated him if it had been earlier, but I think it just would have been a different scenario for him going to that jail.
One thing I wanted to ask you in the indictment, because you and I have talked about that December 18th meeting quite a bit. December 18th, 2021, 2020 rather, you just reminded folks that he was sitting, and this is where people on the White House counsel staff and White House staff were arguing with this group that Vice President Mike Pence later recently referred to as a group of crackpot lawyers. And it wasn't just lawyers, other people were there. But Mark Meadows has been indicted. Rudy Giuliani has been indicted. Donald Trump has been indicted. There are two individuals who were on their side who were there. Sidney Powell, I should note, has been indicted. She was there also. But there are two individuals who were there who have not been indicted. And That's interesting to me. One of them is Mike Flynn, and one of them is the former National Security Advisor in general, and the other one is Patrick Byrne from Overstocked.com. I still don't understand what he was doing in the room, but in any case, he was there as well. What do you know about why Byrne and Flynn are not indicted and may possibly, we don't know, be unindicted co-conspirators?
There's a lot of speculation around all of this, Jake, and I think it's hard for us to get ahead of known facts in a criminal case. In the case of Sidney Powell, what is clear is that she was involved in a lot more than just that meeting, and we knew that in real time. She held that press conference at the RNC, which is the one where Giuliani had the hair dye running down his face. She was talking to Trump for a lot of days prior to that meeting. So I think that with her, it's a continuum. We just don't know what else, if anything, exists related to Mike Flynn and Patrick Byrne.
Curiouser and curiouser, Pulitzer Prize winning star reporter and author of Confidence Man, Maggie Haberman. Always good to see you. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Jake.
Back now with our panel, and Dana Bash. Donald Trump is never one to go softly into that good night. He is responding on Truth Social. Tell us what he's saying.
Well, he's responding on Truth Social. He's also responding on Twitter.
Twitter.
What is formerly known as Twitter.
Has he tweeted in?
He's saying something that is not accurate, but it is the first time he has been on Twitter. I think we're going to discuss how he put it up there, but the mugshot is on Twitter now. Donald J. Trump is back on Twitter, but again, we're going to be judicious in how we show it because of the
but it's the first
expression that he has on there about the election.
And obviously, I mean, the significance, right, is he was banned from Twitter and a bunch of other social media accounts because of his actions on January 6th.